Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Stephanie Cox. A group of pro-Palestine student protesters are facing charges today at Stanford University after locking themselves in the president's office this morning. We'll tell you what the actions the university is taking to punish those students. No date yet for a visit from Israel's Prime Minister to Washington. Congress voicing mixed feelings over it. NTD's Jack Bradley is at the State Department. Former President Trump reversing course and promoting mail-in voting. Find out more about Trump's new plan and why he says he's changing course. Another politician is having a change of heart. New York's governor is putting the brakes on a congestion pricing toll plan. Nearly $50 billion from opioid settlements is now being distributed to states. How will Florida spend its share to combat the crisis? NTD's Daniel Monahan speaks with an addiction specialist about some potentially life-saving strategies. Third time's the charm. Boeing successfully launches its third ever astronaut flight after two previously failed attempts. What's next for the crew and shuttle? Anti-Israel protests continue across college campuses, this time at Stanford University. A group of pro-Palestine students and faculty took over the university president's office today. The protest began around 5:30 this morning on the last day of classes at the Ivy League school. The group said it wasn't going to leave until the demands were met. Similar to other recent anti-Israel protests on college campuses, the pro-Palestine students at Stanford want the university to divest from Israel. Protesters vandalized a memorial to American veterans killed in the line of duty. University leaders had the building cleared by campus police and sheriff's deputies a few hours later. 13 students were arrested and also suspended from the school. And pushback over Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's expected visit to Washington. This would be his fourth time addressing Congress, which would be unprecedented. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley is at the State Department. Jack, what's the latest on this?
Good afternoon, Steph. Well, there is still no date set for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Washington visit, but his visit would be unprecedented. It would be his fourth time addressing a joint session of Congress. He's currently tied with three with Winston Churchill. No other world leader has addressed Congress four times. But to find out the implications of all of this, here's State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is expected to address Congress for the fourth time. He'll be the first world leader to do so. Is that reflective of U.S.-Israeli relations?
So we do have, as I've spoken to many times from here in the past, a long-standing partnership with the Israeli government, and there are deep-standing people-to-people ties between the American people and the Israeli people. And as it pertains to a speech to Congress, ultimately that's a matter for Congress.
Netanyahu accepted this invitation from both Republicans and Democrat members of Congress over the weekend, but mainly he's getting pushback from Democrats on this, like Senators Bernie Sanders and Dick Durbin, who don't agree with Netanyahu's leadership in the Israel-Hamas war. The June 13th proposed date doesn't work out. That's why there's no official date now set for his visit, as that date fell on a Jewish holiday. But the majority of the pushback, like I said, is from Democrats. But there was a light of bipartisanship yesterday in the House when over 40 Democrats joined almost all Republicans in the House to pass a bill that would sanction the United Nations ICC, the International Criminal Court, over its pursuit of arrest warrants for Netanyahu, as well as Yoav Gallant, the defense minister in Israel, over alleged war crimes. Now, all of this comes as Hamas has been sitting on a ceasefire proposal from Israel. Israel said that they would take a three-step proposal. They've confirmed this, that to do the ceasefire would lead to the release of hostages, a restructuring of Gaza in the end, but Hamas has yet to respond. Steph?
All right, Jack Bradley, thank you so much. And next up, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are commenting on President Biden's new executive order on immigration. The Biden administration says it's trying to slow down illegal immigration by shutting down asylum claims between ports of entry. The order went into effect at midnight last night. Video footage shows immigrants making the journey yesterday after Biden announced the order. House Republican Mike Lawler commented, saying, quote, 3.5 years into his administration, he finally realized that he had his executive authority to shut down the border crisis that he himself created, unquote. Some Democrats also said that they were let down by Biden's strategy. From another perspective, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal said, quote, an enforcement-only approach has never worked. It's deeply disappointing that the Biden administration has given in to this same approach, unquote. She joined other Democrats to speak at a rally under the hashtag slogan, asylum is a right. Biden responded to those who think his steps are too strict. He said doing nothing is not an option. And for more on Biden's executive order, we're joined by NTD News contributor Mike Leon. He's the Policy and Strategy Director of the Free and Equal Elections Foundation and host of the news commentary podcast, Can We Please Talk? Mike, good to see you. Do you think that this executive order will effectively reduce illegal immigration overall, in your view?
Well, Steph, good to see you as always. First off, I mean, when you're getting both sides of the aisle mad at you, you know you're onto something, right? So you saw a Democrat and a Republican reaction to this. Look, I've talked with so many people on the border, reporters that are covering this from both sides in Mexico and the U.S. No administration has solved this in over 30 plus years. So President Biden takes action in terms of this executive order, which will limit the amount of asylum seekers to 2,500 a day. That will cap the border. We've been talking about the border so much extensively here. This will potentially help, but legislation that comes from Congress that's executable down at the state level will help a little bit further, right? And we've been divided on that front since Senator Langford obviously put that legislation into motion and it just got held up in the House. So I kudos to the president for actually putting this into place, but we're going to see legal challenges coming from the ACLU on this front. And as you're seeing right now, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are mad at President Biden for not humanizing this issue.
So just talk to me a bit more about the difference between the executive powers and, what Congress can do, because President Biden is saying that Congress is the one that can really, he's always said that Congress is the one that can really fix this. And yet there are plenty of things that President Biden could have done that were effective that he hasn't done. Some of those include catch and release, remain in Mexico. I was just speaking to a former ICE agent earlier today who pointed to some of those things. So what do you think, that Congress can do that President Biden can't do himself?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Well, first off, he could have done this executive order like Representative Lawler said a while ago, right? So, CBP, the Border Patrol agencies have all said that they are overwhelmed. So the crisis that's happening at the border is in terms of enforcement actions. It's in terms of people that work at the border. It's in terms of the immigration courts being backloaded, right, with all of these different case files. So Congress can put into place measures, and Senator Langford's bill did that in terms of hiring agents, in terms of helping with the backlog of the immigration courts. That's what his bill proposed at the beginning, and that's what President Biden has been alleging. Now, here's the other thing that you just mentioned, Steph, the executive order, right? This executive order is going to cap asylum seekers right now on a daily limit. And until it goes back down to 1,500, then it won't obviously pick back up. And this is only from the lawful point of entry, right? So this will help temporarily, but to Representative Lawler's point, why wasn't this done months ago? So the back and forth that's happening in D.C. that we continue to talk about is what President Biden has said. Look, I can do certain executive actions, but just like the Trump administration faced legal challenges from the ACLU and other organizations, President Biden's executive order here is going to face the ramifications of the court. Now, Trump had a conservative majority in his favor, so he was able to get that ban in place, if you recall, back in 2018. President Biden doesn't have that similar majority. So you could see, we're going to see what happens with the Supreme Court, or what happens with the challenges that come from the legal system from these different groups.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point you make, especially on the point of the Senate deal that obviously fell through. Something else that was brought up this morning, I'll put it to you, is that, so this is Victor Avila, an ICE special agent, now retired. He was saying that that Senate deal actually would have drawn in more immigrants, and it would have actually let more people across the border. It created more issues, and he actually felt that this executive order does the same, in that it may lead to people being stopped initially, but that in the end, it could lead to more people coming to the U.S.
Well, I mean, I don't want to disagree with the ICE agent because, again, I don't know specifically what he said. And obviously, he works for the agency. I've not worked for the agency, just talked with reporters and lawmakers down in the area. So I don't want to, refute anything that he kind of told you guys earlier. But the only thing I will say is, with respect to this executive order, right, capping the amount of asylum seekers and keeping them or returning them back to the country that they were of origin, or that they can't prove that they are, having this fear, which is written in the executive order, which is why they're seeking asylum. If they can't prove that, then they are sent back on their way. And under the Biden administration, even under the Trump administration, obviously COVID, you have to look at the COVID numbers, and the Obama administration, we saw the enforcement actions rise steadily month over month. And we saw 68 to 72% were sent back to their country. So, and again, this is just from the lawful point of entries, and this is just according to CBP's numbers. So we can only go off of the data point of the main agencies that is doing all of this stuff. But not to refute what the ICE agent was saying, but what I will say is, again, no administration has actually solved the issue at the border, which is a humanitarian one. It's the countries that are having issues that they're coming from. We haven't been able to solve that. And some of this legislation could have tackled some of this stuff, but it has to emanate from D.C.
Right. And as you mentioned, this all could then follow on and play out in the courts. So we'll have to watch closely and see how that works out. But thank you so much, Mike Leon. Great to speak with you.
As always, Steph.
Yesterday, the American Civil Liberties Union announced it will sue the Biden administration over the new executive order. What could happen, considering that similar actions to Biden's, as proposed by the Trump administration, as I just mentioned, were previously deemed illegal by the federal courts?
Republicans must win, and we must use every appropriate tool available to beat the Democrats. Whether you vote early.
Former President Trump is announcing he's launching a new initiative to increase and encourage Republican early voting. This includes using mail-in and absentee ballots in the November election. Trump's calling the campaign Swamp the Vote. In a news release Tuesday, the presumptive GOP nominee says that Republicans must win, and we will use every appropriate tool to beat the Democrats because he says they are destroying our country. He suggests that swamping the polls with a massive turnout is a sure way to beat the Democrats this November. Trump is reversing course on previous comments he's made about the practice. The former president has long been critical of mail-in ballots and absentee voting. He's said in the past that the practice leads to an increase in election fraud. And next up, a New York City proposal to target traffic congestion and reduce pollution in Midtown Manhattan is being put on hold. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is putting the brakes on the congestion pricing plan that was set to begin in a few weeks.
Sources close to the New York governor say she's considering alternatives to the congestion pricing plan. They include raising the MTA's payroll taxes on large companies and dipping into state cash reserves. They seek to replace the estimated $1 billion in revenue the toll pricing would bring in. Those ideas would need approval from state lawmakers before the New York legislative session ends on Thursday. The money from the tolls would be used for making improvements to the city's mass transit system. Hochul had originally championed the first-in-the-nation toll pricing plan, saying it was good for the environment. But she's reversing course now, saying the toll charge would hurt average New Yorkers more than it would help.
So after careful consideration, I have come to the difficult decision that implementing the planned congestion pricing system risks too many unintended consequences for New Yorkers at this time. For that reason, I have directed the MTA to indefinitely pause the program.
The governor received harsh criticisms over the toll pricing proposal. Former President Trump vowed to eliminate the plan if he's reelected. The toll proposal is also facing several lawsuits. A Manhattan federal court judge earlier this month heard arguments brought by the Public School Teachers Union, political leaders, and other New Yorkers. And in New Jersey, a federal court judge has also heard arguments in legal challenges brought by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy.
Nearly $50 billion from multiple lawsuits related to the opioid crisis is now being distributed to states. NTD's Daniel Monahan speaks with an addiction specialist about how the money could best be spent.
John Pulse is a master certified addiction professional operating in the South Florida region. The Sunshine State is now deciding how to use $25 million in opioid settlement money and an additional nearly $128 million over 2 decades. The addiction professional says prevention education is evidence-based and works.
The ultimate form of harm reduction is to prevent somebody from becoming addicted to opioids and using substances in the first place, of course.
Another area Pulse says money needs to go is recovery-oriented community resource centers,
where people will drop in that may be in early recovery or they could still be in active addiction, and they can get, assistance for housing, perhaps, transportation, help with vocational assistance and finding jobs, getting like basic food and resources and things like that. And then they also have Narcan available from a harm reduction standpoint.
But won't people take advantage of the system, try to get a free ride, free housing, and just keep using drugs?
So what we found is that when people have some of their basic needs taken care of, so for example, if someone is, housing insecure, they don't know where they're going to live, they're going to get their next meal, they're less likely to engage in any type of recovery support services. Think about it as if, you are having a difficult time knowing how you're going to pay your light bill, but really you need to go to therapy. What are you going to be more concerned about? Like, I'm going to be concerned making sure I have electricity. And so what the research indicates is that when people do have some of their basic needs taken care of, they are more likely to engage in recovery support services. Now, of course, there will be examples of people taking advantage of the system. That's kind of an unavoidable hazard, but it's certainly not the majority.
What about boot camp style treatment centers? Couldn't some tough love do the trick?
So what that essentially stems from is that this idea that substance use disorder and addiction is a moral failing. And so because it's a moral failing, you have to punish it out of them, And again, I go back to like, if it worked, great, If you could kind of shame somebody into sobriety and punish them, then I would be, with the tragedies I've seen on a daily basis, on some level, I would be all for it, but it's just ineffective. So
Pulse thinks needle exchanges also deserve funding. Himself a father, he understands people who have the knee-jerk, not in my backyard reaction to that.
I think that there's this false belief that they're just all going to congregate, and then there's going to be more people using drugs, that there's a syringe exchange. But the truth is, nobody wakes up one day and thinks, wow, now that there's a syringe exchange nearby, I think I ought to inject drugs. It's the only people that are going are people that are already injecting drugs. And they can do so in a way that doesn't spread disease, which, by the way, impacts the community, when there's like an increases rates of HIV transmission and hepatitis C.
Lawsuits accused drug companies of misleading patients and doctors about the dangers of prescription medicine, leading to a crisis starting in the early 2000s. By the 2010s, opioid addictions and overdoses surged, causing over 1,000 deaths annually in South Florida alone. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
When we come back, some retail store workers are wearing body cameras. We'll explain why store owners are using the technology.
Hi, I'm Susan Lucci. I never thought about heart disease until I had my own heart event. I received 2 stents in my arteries, stents developed through research funded by the American Heart Association. Those stents saved my life. I have met so many survivors. Each of them tells a story that can be so helpful to women out there.
Everything was pretty good. It was a very happy life. I was given the diagnosis that I had peripartum cardiomyopathy, which is basically a pregnancy-induced heart failure. They told me my only chance was a heart transplant.
And the American Heart Association helped make that possible. Their research helped save me.
I think everyone should support the American Heart Association. Call now or go to helpheart.org. For only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can help fund the next medical breakthrough. Get the next person trained in CPR, the next hospital certified in high-quality cardiovascular care. You can be part of that very important work that the American Heart Association is doing to save lives everywhere. Give $19 a month with your credit card, and we'll send you this special t-shirt that you can wear to show that you are helping save lives.
I'm grateful for just every day that I get with my children. I am very thankful for the American Heart Association.
Heart disease is America's #1 killer, and your support now can help save your life or the life of someone you love. Listen to your heart. The only reason I'm here today is because I did. So please call the number on your screen or go to helpheart.org now. Join me as a monthly donor today and help save even more lives.
Imagine a coffee that cares for your health. Expertly fermented with a 50 enzyme complex to enhance flavor and remove bitterness. Small batch roasted to a decadent medium dark, resulting in a brew that is gentle on digestion, low acid, and up to 90% less caffeine than regular coffee. Try America's first enzyme fermented coffee today.
Images of Navy shipyards producing classified nuclear submarines allegedly snapped by a drone flown by a Chinese student. The Justice Department has charged Shen Yun Shop with 6 misdemeanors under the Espionage Act. According to an article by Wired, she is a student at the University of Minnesota. Court documents say he allegedly flew a drone at Newport News Shipyard in Virginia this January. The shipyard makes highly classified Navy aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines. Because of bad weather, Xi's drone got stuck in a local resident's tree. The resident reported him to authorities after she approached for help. She is now living in Virginia under probation. He could face up to 6 years in prison. And next, eBay shoppers will no longer be able to use their American Express cards and body cams for retail workers. Here's NTD's Don Ma with today's Business Matters.
Thank you, Steph. To start off, online marketplace behemoth eBay said it plans to no longer accept American Express, and it's citing what the company says are unacceptable high fees and that customers have other payment options to shop online. So it is a notable blow to American Express, whose customers are often the most attractive among merchants and spend the most money per month on their cards. But it's not the first time that merchants have voiced opposition to Amex's business practices by walking away. Most notably, the warehouse chain Costco nearly a decade ago. So an eBay spokesperson said in a statement that after careful consideration, eBay has decided to no longer accept American Express globally effective August 17th. Due to unacceptably high fees American Express charges for processing credit card transactions. So online merchants have become increasingly combative actually with payment processors in recent years over the fees that they charge to accept payments. Amazon had a similar fight with Visa, for example, in the UK. Meanwhile, hourly retail security workers are now wearing police-like body cameras at major stores. So retail giant TJX, the parent of TJ Maxx, Marshalls, and Home Goods, said it's equipping some store employees with body cameras to thwart shoplifting and keep customers and employees safe. So TJX isn't alone. So in a survey of major chains by the National Retail Federation last year, around 35% of U.S. retailers said they were researching body cameras for the employees. The manufacturers of taser devices and other security companies are now designing and marketing body cameras specifically for retail workers. All right, that's all from me, Steph. Back to you.
Boeing just successfully launched its first ever astronaut rocket into space. That's an exciting move as it's been in competition with SpaceX and trying to reach their goals there.
and start on a roll.
The two astronauts are now heading to the International Space Station. It's a milestone in the aerospace giant's ambitions to, as I mentioned, step up its competition with Elon Musk's SpaceX. The launch planned last Saturday was canceled due to a computer issue. With only a split-second takeoff, Boeing had to call the launch off. But today it was all good. Next, the team has to navigate returning to Earth in about a week. And finally, for this show, a bill to safeguard access to contraceptives faces a Senate vote today. The measure is part of a push by congressional Democrats to focus public attention on access to abortion ahead of the November election. So we'll be covering that and more on the evening news tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 Pacific. Stay tuned.